We acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's spirit, imagination and rich history of storytelling and humour that is an inspiration for all Australians.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bearer of Weird News. My name is Matt Harvey. I am, as always, the suppository of all wisdom and your host for another episode. Hear ye, hear ye. This episode coincides with International Town Criers Day, the day that celebrates the historical relevance of town criers throughout history. As one who bears news, this is a day that comes close to our hearts, and we would be remiss if we didn't look back over our forebears as news bearers. Your classic bell-ringing town crier. Oyez, oyez, or hear ye, hear ye. Classic stuff, 3 stars. And if we didn't acknowledge the sacrifices of messengers past, like the messengers from Persia, who were allegedly kicked into a bottomless pit in slow motion by the king of Sparta, as depicted in the historical documentary 300. This, of course, cannot be verified, as there was no messenger left to bring back the message. And of course there is celebrity town crier and messenger Moses, who started the first Christian media outlet, the Weekly Tablet. Of course he wanted to expand into a more regular rotation, possibly even a daily tablet, but by the time he'd finished chiseling the day's tablet, it was sort of time for the next day, and he had to start all over again. And of course, July 1st was International Reggae Day, as you would all definitely be aware of, as you would have been celebrating. Sun is shining, and we are keeping an especially close eye on the predominantly white countries and how exactly they be jamming on this day. Though we do encourage you to celebrate, just not as much, not too much. You hear me? You hear me? Keep it easy. No fake dreads, no Bob Marley impressions, and if you don't know any more than that, just don't partake. It's a really simple thing. It's easy. Just get up, stand up, and exodus. No need to steer it up, stand alone, outside of the party. No fussing and fighting. Could you be loved? Sure. If you aren't a whaler, when asked not to participate. Now, of course, before we get into the episode proper, I need to let you know that I am, of course, on tour, taking my show, Wage Against the Machine, around. We'll be going to Darwin on the 21st and 22nd of July at Dom's Bar and Lounge, doing a 5:40 and 7:10 show, but I would double check those just to be sure. We'll be at the Edinburgh Free Fringe as part of the PBH Free Fringe Festival from the 5th to the 27th of August in Cannons Gate, which is a lovely little venue down on the Royal Mile, at 8:10 every day. And if you're in Sydney, do come out to see me for the very first time at the Sydney Comedy Fringe, or the Sydney Fringe, from September 14th to 17th. But we're doing shows the 14th, the 16th and the 17th, 2 shows at 8:10, and the Sunday show is at 7:10 at the Factory Theatre. So if you're in any of those places and you want to come see the show, support the podcast by coming and see a live show, we'd really appreciate that. If you can't come out to one of the live shows, of course you can always join the Patreon. Yes, the Patreon does exist. That's where we put bonus content. So if you've enjoyed this and you want to hear some more, you're more than welcome to sign up to one of our tiers on the Patreon and get our bonus content. But until then, of course, I will be the bearer of weird news. So let's start by getting into the headlines. A former advisor to Russian President Vladimir Putin has reiterated his belief that using nuclear weapons would prevent World War III from happening. Now, this might sound like warmongering justification, but it honestly makes sense. If the human race was wiped out in a nuclear winter, they cannot go into another world war. It's just simple maths, guys. Nestle has announced the iconic Fantails chocolate is going to be discontinued. I can't say that I'm surprised. I have never bought a Fantail in my life. They were always sort of just there on the table in a packet of something that was given as a prize or was in a show bag, you know? Like, they were haunting the other snacks as an eternal spectre who can't pass on until they completed their unfinished business. An impossible task, as their unfinished business was to be eaten in full. Nestle said they'd need to discontinue the sale of Fantails after someone discovered the facts hadn't been updated for about 93 years. Sales had of course been steadily declining after people who had tried to eat one once then spent the next 30 years trying to get it out of their teeth, so there was no need to eat another. Nestle says that they want to focus their money on securing the world's water supply, with the CEO saying it'll be a much better seller than the Fantails. An 86-year-old has returned a copy of George Orwell's 1984 to a library 65 years late, saying it needs to be read now more than ever. Oh really? Really? Well, listen here, buddy. Maybe if you hadn't been hoarding this one copy for the last 65 years, more people could have read it. You know what? I am somewhat inclined to assign you a significant portion of the blame for people's behaviour in the last few decades. A San Diego radio DJ who loves slow jams, man, said he has visited all the UN-recognised countries, so he founded a nation of his own called Slow Jamistan, and crowned himself its sultan, even calling himself the dictator of Slow Jamistan. While it hasn't been officially recognised by the US, they have called dibs on holding a peacekeeping mission there should any sort of valuable resource be discovered under the ground of Slow Jamistan. A 76-year-old woman who has been declared dead and surprised her relatives by knocking on her coffin during her own wake earlier this month has died after 7 days in intensive care. Hey, are we sure about this? Like, really sure? Like, maybe we should just wait and see on this one. Almost bury me alive once, shame on you. Almost bury me alive twice, maybe get a better doctor. The first virgin birth in crocodiles has been discovered after a female crocodile who'd been living in isolation was discovered to be pregnant. And I for one welcome our new lizard messiah. All hail Lizard Jesus. He did say that he would return, but he didn't say what form that would take. Amen. A man knocked down a wall in his basement, only to discover an abandoned underground city that was once home to 20,000 people. He immediately listed the underground city as a fixer-upper, mutant hermit mole man's dream home, only $1,000 a week plus utilities. Researchers reconstructed the evolutionary origins of primate masturbation and found that it goes back at least 40 million years to the ancestor of all monkeys and apes. Teenage boys the world over are now telling their parents that they're retreating to their room to spend time LARPing as ancient man, and their parents need to stop shaming them for simply continuing our species' oldest tradition. I mean, honestly, what's the point of the opposable thumb if you aren't going to put it to good use? You'd be wasting nature's greatest gift. They're considering renaming the species Australopithecus erectus to greater reflect the new information. A new study says dad jokes have a positive effect on children's physical and cognitive development. How? Well, they help them improve their grown-up sense of humour. Haha. Seems dad jokes help their kids with a number of cognitive developments, including the power of imagination, as they really need to stretch their imagination to find the jokes funny. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station have achieved a 98% water recovery rate in a breakthrough water recovery achievement using the pee and sweat on the ISS. Reportedly, the engineers are thrilled with this retention rate. The astronauts were heard saying, "Oh, I bet the engineers are thrilled. They're not the ones up in the space station." In typically Elon Musk news, Musk says cisgender will be considered a slur on Twitter. Now, I don't know if anyone has told Musk, but the term cisgender is still allowed inside the OceanGate submarine and even on board the Titanic. So if he could just help us by jumping in one of those and heading down, we'd really appreciate all of his hard work. Speaking of unstable rich people, the lost Titanic submarine has officially been found to have imploded, killing all the occupants, including OceanGate CEO Stockton Rush, who died doing what he loved, cheaping out on life-saving safety precautions to save a buck. Rush was at least courteous enough to die on his own cost-saving experimental transport, unlike Jeff Bezos, the coward who not only had the audacity to survive his space trip, but then surrounded himself with people that we would actually care about if they died, like a true coward. Silvio Berlusconi, the scandal-scarred former Italian leader, has died at 86. To honour his memory, in the most appropriate way, there will be a state bunga bunga party held in his honour. And if you don't know what a bunga bunga party is, well, you can roll the dice on whether or not you're going to Google that, or decide that you don't need to risk doing a factory reset on your computer. It's up to you. Alright, that's the end of the headlines for this episode. We're going to move on now to the bigger stories, starting with sports news. Sports! Two things that have happened recently that we, the people, have been clamouring for years. First, to avoid her country being disqualified, a Belgian shot putter, Jolien Boomkou, stepped up to help her country by running in the 100 metres hurdles at the European Athletics Team Championships after a teammate was injured, giving us the first ever regular person comparison in a high-level athletic competition as a measure of just how good these athletes actually are, something that we've been clamouring for years. Here is some footage of the shot putter giving it her all. Now here's the problem. I personally think that she would have pulled a better time than most armchair Olympians. And so it's actually failed to settle the schadenfreude hard-on most people have when watching someone fail, but has given us just a little bit of a taste of that good life that we could have if we had an ordinary person competing as a control in world-class Olympics. We are so close to glory. It's like we're a shot putter running a hurdle race. It might take us a minute to get to the finish, but we'll eventually get there. But there is one other dream that people have had when it comes to sports, specifically the Olympics. And the enhanced games may see that dream come true, as it is an Olympic-style competition for drug-taking athletes. Now, this idea is being launched by a Melbourne-born, London-based businessman and friend of Peter Youngblood will stop him from dying Teal, Aaron D'Souza. He plans to stage the inaugural games of no drug testing in December next year, and apparently 2 high-profile Australian athletes have expressed interest. At one point, I would have thought Warney, but his death has made that impossible, so presumably it's some of the members of the Essendon AFL team. The sports categories for consideration will be track and field, swimming, weightlifting, gymnastics, combat sports, piano throwing, hot dog eating, doubles, suggesting bad names and businesses that we should start, man, the 1,000-meter calling people a dog cunt, and in place of boxing, they'll have the first ever, you wanted to start something, let's take this outside, fuckhead, huh? Let's get outside, fuckhead, huh? So it should actually be a really exciting lineup. And every Olympics needs a good mascot. The obvious frontrunners are Syringe, the source of all power. Bongo, B-O-N-G-O, and Bongo is his name. And of course, Lance Armstrong's testicle. D'Souza has a unique selling point, saying that the location for the inaugural Enhanced Games wouldn't need to spend exorbitant funds to host, as there wouldn't be nearly as many athletes competing. And as the meth capital of Australia, I think Perth is our obvious choice, not only for harvesting champions, but as the perfect first host city. We wouldn't even have to move our best and most belligerent, as they'd already be in the city. Not only that, D'Souza said competing athletes would be given stocks in Enhanced Games, a for-profit entity which he is self-funding with his I'm a friend of a billionaire money, and is unsurprisingly attracting interest from investors in California's Silicon Valley, which of course it is. Why wouldn't it be? Weird, money-wasting ideas are Silicon Valley. That's what you do. That's what they do. They love it. You can't spell California Silicon Valley without insolvency. Take a second, pause it if you need to. It's all in there. We all done? Great. Don't get too excited about that little wordplay thing we did there, because you also can't spell California Silicon Valley without colonizer facial villainy, corona fiscally villainies, filers occasional villainy, occasional rifles villainy, and falconry social villainies. Take from those what you will, but you won't get much from them. Silicon Valley is where ideas go to become enhanced by steroids, stripped of what little merit they had to begin with, and then left in the street to die for not being able to afford the exorbitant rents due to the economic destruction that they've wrought. So, get in there and win us some medals, you hulked up freak shows. The best thing about the Drug Olympics, which, have no doubt, is what this will forever be known as. Well, it's either that or the Russian Games, as the Russians are the champions in the field. They will dominate these games the same way that Australia dominates the Commonwealth Games, without mercy. This may even be their best chance at sports washing their reputation after they're done trying to invade Ukraine. But the best thing is that when the winners win at the Drug Olympics, they'll all get endorsement deals with local drug companies and have their faces on the little MDMA pills, which, of course, they will get a cut of the sales, as this is the modus operandi of these games. Now, of course, all of this money will lead to them having enough money to be able to afford the needed drugs that keep that competitive edge and take out current running favourites, Team Russia. Moving on now to short coup news. Russia's war in Ukraine. Yeah, that's still happening despite the lack of interest that you've shown in it recently. Not only is the war in Ukraine still happening, but Russia is so desperate for a win that they've started a war within their war. Babushka wars. Smaller wars within the wars, which then has a smaller war within that, and a smaller war within that. It's very Russian. A mercenary chief brought a group known as the Wagner Group, led by Russian billionaire Yevgeny Prigozhin, a man who looks like an AI generation of a man from the prompt Russian chef in an American film, a man known as Vladimir Putin's chef, who was long suspected to be the organizer's founder. Initially said he had 25,000 fighters moving from Ukraine towards Moscow to restore justice, and vowed that he and his men would destroy anyone who stood in their way. Seems Russia is going to war with Russia, so that they can show that they would be better at doing war with Ukraine. You following? Because don't let this attempted coup fool you. Pushkin was by no means trying to end the war. The Wagner Group, who has been accused of human rights abuse, war crimes, unlawful killings, and gold smuggling, is certainly unhappy with the war in Ukraine, calling it a disgrace. But not because the Russian military is wiping out entire cities and committing war crimes. Those are his favourite bits of the war. No, he actually was hoping to find a little bit more gold on this war. It's certainly a more interesting way to go gold digging than walking along the beach. He's critical of the army and its leadership for not fighting well enough. Apparently this has been too slow and too nice, which is not a sentence that has ever been uttered in the history of Russian warfare, nor Russian space exploration, or Russian day-to-day living. The most humanitarian thing you could say they've done is the sheltering of Edward Snowden, and that isn't because they want to do a nice thing, it's because fuck you Americans, that's why. Yeah, Prigozhin says army bosses are weak because they are unwilling to use tactical nuclear weapons. So just Russia having a completely normal war then? Great. The Wagner Group started as a shadowy organisation that operated mostly in Africa and the Middle East on Putin's behalf, though foreign policy expert Federica Saini Fasanotti wrote for the Brookings Institute last year that Moscow disavows any command and control over them to absolve itself of their problematic behaviour, such as egregious human rights violations and abuse of civilians. Because we wouldn't want Russia's sterling international reputation on human rights to be tarnished. That'd be a real waste of all those years of hard work earning that good reputation. He is known as Vladimir Putin's chef, as Prigozhin is a former hot dog seller. So the progression from hot dog seller to warlord was actually a natural one, as he was used to hurting people and wasn't afraid to fill your stomach with foreign objects. Now, Prigozhin was adamant this was a march for justice, not a coup, which makes sense. I attended a march for justice in Melbourne, and I tell you, it just really didn't feel like we were looking for justice until somebody finally showed up with some nuclear weapons. Then I was thinking, now we're marching for justice. Prigozhin's insurrection lasted only 24 hours before the Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko brokered a deal promising safe passage and amnesty for his troops and a one-way ticket to Belarus for himself. Magically, shortly after this announcement, Prigozhin aborted his march to the Russian capital, and his soldiers began to withdraw from the 2 Russian cities that they had occupied. Now this is confusing for me. This doesn't sound like the actions of either a mercenary who was being successful or the behaviour of old Vladimir, a man notorious for taking names and a penchant for poisoning. But I think the Wagner Group went about this all the wrong way. If Prigozhin wanted to humiliate Putin and show that he was the one for the job, he already had everything that he needed. He is a trusted chef, after all. He could poison him with a hot dog and tell the world that he had defeated the mighty Putin with nothing but a pig anus. Honestly, you could have a taste tester for a hot dog. They would get sick, fall to the ground, like gripping their stomach in pain, and all you would think was, well, it is a hot dog, so that feels like a normal reaction. Moving on now to short-lived utopia news. Queensland. That's what happens when you let Australians get a little too Australian. Queensland has been going through a little bit of an identity crisis recently after in the last election it ended up putting the most Greens candidates in seats, but still remains the state whose state turd is a two-way tie between Pauline Hanson and Bob Katter. But on top of that, the world's largest nature reserve for the critically endangered coal mine. And with Tanya Plibersek, the Federal Environment Minister and proud mother of a brand new baby coal mine, giving the green light to the Isaac River coal mine in Queensland's Bowen Basin. Well, I guess that's more the black light to go ahead, right? Look, it's just nice that future generations will have the chance to see an active coal mine in person and not just hear stories about them from the history books. So that's very exciting. The Queensland government has, however, made a decision to increase royalties on high record coal prices, which has contributed to the $10 billion revenue windfall and the record surplus, allowing the state to fund some cost of living relief for Queenslanders, including the largest energy rebate in the country, which Queenslanders are going to need as the impact of the coal mines drives the heat in Queensland to higher and higher levels and makes it near impossible for them to live there without near constant air conditioning. Since coming to power after campaigning on greater climate action, Albanese's Labor government has enshrined into law a stronger emissions reduction target of 43% by 2030, has negotiated the introduction of a carbon cap for the country's biggest emitters, and in February blocked a coal mine on environmental grounds for the first time in history. But it is worth noting that they have refused to rule out new coal and gas projects, and the blocked project did not consider climate in its reasons for doing so, despite the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change saying any new fossil fuel projects are not compatible with the aim of the Paris Agreement, which is limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. In fact, existing fossil fuel infrastructure actually needs to be urgently phased out. So I do worry that this method of gaining a surplus will serve as a blueprint going forward, but the blueprint will just consist of more and more coal mine approvals to gain those precious surpluses. The Queensland 2023 budget will see the Coal Royalty Boom Fund $550 energy rebate, free kindergarten, the aforementioned record surplus, and the most generous rebate of all states and territories, and which means many Queenslanders won't actually have to pay for electricity at all next year, creating a utopia state where these kids will live in a perfect world. They will never know the harms caused by the generations before them as they sit in perfectly environmentally stable rooms looking out into the beauty of a world that they can never walk in before they simultaneously drown and burn to death in boiling water. And all of these things are thanks to the life-saving / destroying power of coal. Hail coal! Moving on now, it is alien news. Aliens! Our neighbours to the extreme north, and the original and still best conspiracy theory. The US has been pretty flippant with UFO revelations in recent years, being so bold as to confirm a large number of videos as officially being unidentified objects that are indeed flying. And now they're going so far as to admitting they need help after the US asked the UK for help with UFO investigations, as the Pentagon says alien life has not been ruled out. I suppose it would have to remain a possibility because recent surveys of intelligent life on Earth have found the planet wanting. We desperately need to reach out and find a benevolent extraterrestrial caretaker species to nurse us into our final days on this slowly burning planet. At a recent gathering of the Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Alliance, consisting of the US, the UK, Canada, Australia and New Zealand, collectively known as a colonization of questionable choices, they met to discuss enhancing collaboration in terms of reporting and analysing UFO sightings. I think this is somewhat audacious of the US to come asking for help on this now, We've been demanding a straight answer about Roswell since the 1950s. Sure, it's fun to withhold when people are coming to you for the answers, but now you've really fucked things up, haven't you? Haven't you? And look at this nonsense. Journalists like Leslie Keane and Ralph Blumenthal, in an article for science and technology news site The Debrief, report the US government, its allies, and defense contractors have retrieved multiple craft of non-human origin. They also report this information has been illegally withheld from US Congress, according to former US intelligence official David Grush. We're using the word intelligence loosely here, as Grush claims that the US is in possession of multiple vehicles or spacecraft constructed by a non-human intelligence, and that their existence is being concealed from the public. And while he had not personally seen any of the alleged alien spacecraft, he had seen some interesting photos and read some very interesting reports. Though he stated that the vehicles were not necessarily extraterrestrial and speculated that they might have come from another dimension, stating, as somebody who studied physics, where maybe they're coming from a different physical dimension as described in quantum mechanics. Now, does this sound like a man that I should be taking news tips from? If I were living in a parallel dimension centered around life being a major blockbuster science fiction film where the town crazy turned out to be the only one who actually genuinely was speaking the truth, then yeah, sure, why not? But we don't live there. Here's the thing. To get things published, a pre-publication and security review is required, right? The Pentagon confirms information proposed for public release is reviewed to ensure compliance with established national and Department of Defense policies, and to determine it contains no classified, controlled, unclassified, export controlled, or operational security related information, right? So, if Grush's information is true, it surely was both classified and operational security related. So why would the Pentagon approve its publication? It's a fair question, right? If Grush's information is false, it would probably not qualify as classified or operational security related, and thus not be an issue, right? But this raises another question. Why would the Pentagon approve the publication of an unfounded conspiracy theory about itself? And these guys now have the audacity to ask for our help. Did they forget which were the things that they made up and allowed into public and which were the ones that genuinely just didn't know anything about? Have they spent so long undermining the power and respectability of the media that they need to turn to foreign powers to get a hint of credibility? You just know that the whole idea of aliens having already been here is done and dusted after Trump took office. That idiot can't even keep his mouth shut to stop himself from potentially going to jail. And he hasn't. He just hasn't. Even accidentally spilled the beans on alien life being held somewhere in America. He was showing classified documents and getting input on Korea from Kid Rock at one point. Dude would absolutely have told everyone that he'd seen the evidence, the spaceships, and had eaten some alien meat. Besides, why would they come and visit us? I don't know if you're aware of this. We left a big mess out there on the moon. The moon, right, that's our front yard. And we just left some space buggies, a hammer, a feather, photos, toys, and 96 bags of feces and urine. That's true. Look it up now. I'll give you time. See? 96 bags! That is a lot of feces. Now, it's obvious why they left them there. You've got to leave some stuff behind to make the vehicle lighter so that you can move. It's fine. It's fine, right? You always end up leaving stuff behind when you move. It's fine. But this is why the aliens won't be visiting us. Have you ever seen a house that has like a car or a bunch of fridges or appliances in their front yard and thought, I really should go inside that house? No, you avoid that house. That's the house that all the kids in the neighborhood are scared of. The one that they all tell stories about. Maybe a witch lives there, or maybe a serial killer who never got caught. Now think about the house that has 96 bags of shit out the front of it. Are you going to visit that house? No! And that's us. We are the witch house of the universe. We are the ones with the car in the front yard. A car and 96 bags of shit. Moving on now, it is baby boomer news. Baby boomers. Born between 1946 and 1964, their generational label is derived from the baby boom that occurred post-World War II, where the fertility rate was 3.5 babies per woman, and are generally classified by receiving a free education, some even getting a Commonwealth Bank bursary that paid full salary while they were studying, multiple home ownership, relatively cheap global air travel, which didn't require them to remove their shoes, belts, and compress them into a 33 inches of legroom in an aggressive attempt to force them to pay more money to upgrade out of their terrible seats. Rapid medical advances, low unemployment, and no tech companies attempting to disrupt the workforce, and a growing contempt for generations pointing out that they had things easier than we do, and should maybe give up some of their wealth and power or die, and clear up some space on the planet that they killed. Well, now the latest example of, hey, the young will fix that problem that we totally created, has risen its head. Young Australians face the prospect of paying a levy to cover the cost of aging boomers' care. Well, I mean, it's only fair. They got free education and a stable economy. They didn't actually know how to look after themselves. They're domesticated. They're like zoo animals. If we release them into the economy, they die from never having to learn to look after themselves or struggle with any kind of real problem. So it's only fair that we look after them, right? Aged Care Minister Annika Wells warned the boomers are coming this week in a message millennials have been spouting for years now. Labor is trying to make good on an election promise and bring dramatic improvements to the country's caring economy for older Australians. And working Australians could be facing an extra Medicare-style levy to pay for it all. Appearing on the ABC's Insiders, Wells wouldn't rule out a major new tax to revamp the aged care system, which is hard for those who were hoping to move into the future without dying in their workplace due to the economic necessity of working into their late 90s after the destruction of what was known in the before times as a stable economy. There is a lot of pushback against the idea of leveraging what younger generations have left after their planet and economies were destroyed by the relentless need for growth under capitalism. And implementing an aged care levy would merely make the intergenerational inequalities even worse. Baby boomers own half of Australia's wealth, despite being just 1/5 of the population, an estimated $10.4 trillion. $10.4 trillion certainly sounds like it'd adequately cover the costs of taking care of the baby boomers, especially given as of June 2021, the country's GDP was an estimated $1.98 trillion. Their generation got a lot, and it's time for them to stop being so selfish and give back a little. From each according to his ability to each according to his needs, but only within their own generation. They can use their extraordinary wealth to save themselves, and if they still don't think they can afford it, well, I have a few suggestions for them to help manage their financial future. They can cut back on a few luxuries like avocados and luxury brands like Coles brand bread. Maybe stop drinking coffee or cut back on larger luxuries like the relentless pursuit of profits under the capitalist system and live more within their means, allowing for the excesses that they've hoarded like a dragon in a cave to be redistributed. Hey? Sounds pretty good. After the Aged Care Royal Commission issued the report in 2021, there was a recommendation for the imposition of a levy. Given Labor also looked into the adequacy of job seeker, and the recommendation was that it be lifted, and then they didn't do that, we can obviously rule this out. Recommendations are exactly that. Recommendations. So we need something more concrete. Seeing as they love the stock market so much, and it has been so good to them, we can use the Housing Affordability Future Fund model to pay for their aged care. Just take a few billion and put it into the stock market. Maybe mix it up by sending some of it to a casino. The oldies love the old Crown Casino. And we can see if there are any profits from that. And if so, we use those profits with a $500 million cap on the annual benefit. And if there isn't enough for everyone in a single year, well, the rest will just have to wait it out. After all, we can't provide for everyone, right? It's only fair. Moving on now to corruption news. Political corruption is back, baby! Corruption has made its way back into the news cycle, and we have been looking back over some of our old friends and some of their best shady behaviour. The first corrupt cab off the rank, the UK's favourite party boy, Boris Johnson. A new report has found Boris Johnson deliberately misled UK Parliament over Partygate. The report will be the cover story for magazine as part of their No Shit Spectacular. A committee of UK lawmakers harshly rebuked former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, saying he lied to Parliament about lockdown flouting parties and was complicit in a campaign to intimidate those investigating his conduct during the coronavirus pandemic. The House of Commons Privileges Committee found Johnson's actions were such a flagrant violation of the rules that they warranted a 90-day suspension from Parliament, where he still served after stepping down as Prime Minister last year. The committee's sanction would have been more than enough to trigger a by-election that could have cost Johnson his seat in Parliament. But he definitely avoided that by resigning after the committee gave him advance notice of its findings. Johnson repeated his claim that the panel was a kangaroo court bent on ousting him from Parliament. And it might just be, because it is a delicious surprise to see him sort of see consequences. Rishi Sunak has desperately tried to shift attention away from Johnson since he took office in October. A near impossible task, as Sunak no doubt found Johnson is in fact an attention-seeking black hole. Instead of sucking in matter, he sucks in the attention of all those around him and manages to compress their intelligence to a singularity. If you aren't familiar with the Partygate scandal, as you live in a country other than the UK and have your own terrible parliamentarians to focus on, that's fine. Members of Johnson's staff held a series of parties in 2020 and 2021 when parties were prohibited by pandemic restrictions that he himself put in place. The Partygate scandal angered the public, not French levels of angry public, but for a British public, they were pretty outwardly flustered, and that is a very big sign. Johnson initially denied that any parties took place, then reportedly assured lawmakers that pandemic rules and guidance were followed at all times at the parties it turned out did happen, despite his denying they existed earlier. The committee concluded that those assurances were misleading and that Johnson failed to correct the record when asked to do so. This amounted to a serious contempt of Parliament. The committee concluded Johnson committed 5 contempts of Parliament, including misleading the Commons and the cross-party group investigating him. Only 7 MPs voted against the report, as opposed to the 354 who voted for it. 354 to 7. Those are bad results. I haven't seen a more lopsided result since Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson started his tug-of-war league where he battled exclusively against teams of primary school children. I don't know what he is trying to prove taking on those children. Maybe the anger of Black Adam not working out is manifesting in some weird ways. Just make another jungle-based adventure film, Dwayne. People love those, and I don't think they can tell them apart, so just keep doing that forever. So of course, Boris resigned in a classic "you can't fire me if I quit" outburst. Now, had he not resigned, a suspension of 10 days or more would have allowed Johnson's constituents to circulate a recall petition to oust him from the House of Commons. The committee found that Johnson's misleading statements warranted a suspension long enough to trigger such a recall petition. And despite all this being voted against, he is, if nothing else, a party man to the end, falling on his COVID nasal swab and saving the party from losing an election. However, because he resigned, he will be punished. And from what I hear, it's a real doozy. So what do we have? Fines? Loss of privileges? Jail time? What could it possibly be? A motion was passed that said he should be blocked from receiving a parliamentary pass. Ladies, gentlemen, and others, we got him! That sounds bad. What's that? What does that mean? It sounds real bad though. It must be bad given the scale of vitriol from his compatriots. Right? So what is that? What's that? It's a pass given to most ex-MPs which allows unfiltered access to the parliamentary estate. And he doesn't get it? And that's everything. Really? You sure there's nothing else? Are we on delay? Losing his pass simply means that he must be accompanied by another member if he wants to enter Parliament's buildings. But he's still able to access his entitlement to public funding for legal support if he's sued over decisions that he took whilst in government, or something that it seems he will probably need at some point. And his former Prime Ministerial entitlement, a yearly £115,000 allowance to support his special position in public life. Yeah, he still gets all that. Yeah. Fuck. Oh, this punishment is symbolic. Oh, it's symbolic. Okay. Well, why didn't you just say that in the first place? That's what I was worried about. His symbolic status. And symbolically, this represents a thunderous repudiation of Boris by his former peers, apparently. Well, then I look forward to the same symbolic anger being applied to people receiving the UK equivalent of job seeker when they do something wrong on purpose and then lie about it multiple times. The rules have just changed. Looks like deception is back on the menu. Boris, of course, called the investigation a witch hunt, as is standard, but it seems that he had no need to wail and complain except for victim peacocking status, virtue signalling, if you will. But it seems he needn't have bothered based on the consequences laid out here. But arguably, a symbolic punishment needs a symbolic repudiation so we can be symbolically placated. That makes sense, right? And if you don't get it, well, obviously, you're just too stupid to understand the symbolism of it all. It's very deep and it's very clever, alright? But we are doing our own corruption tango here in Australia. Do we have two corrupt feet? Let's find out. Let's not fuck it up. Come on! So it seems the results of the Independent Commission Against Corruption investigation into Gladys Berejiklian is done. And oh boy, is the soap operification of politics back, baby! The ICAC found Gladys had taken steps to award government grants in a desire on her part to maintain or advance her relationship with former state MP Daryl Maguire. Ooh, Gladys and Daryl sitting in a gun club, KISSING. First comes the telling your work colleagues, then comes funding grants, then comes Daryl with a corruption charge. Ooh. More than $5 million was announced for a gun club that Maguire had been pushing for in his electorate of Wagga Wagga. The report also ruled that Berejiklian's actions over the Riverina Conservatorium of Music were influenced by a desire on her part to maintain or advance that relationship. $5 million for a gun club, Gladys? Most people just go with a fancy dinner, maybe get some jewelry or do a sex act that they normally wouldn't be interested in. $5 million of taxpayer money is definitely a distinct and unique gift. I will give you credit for that. The 688-page report found the former Premier turned Optus Employee of the Month engaged in serious, corrupt conduct and breached the public's trust. The Commission also faulted her for not disclosing her relationship with Maguire and for failing to report any suspicions she had about Maguire's activities to the ICAC, saying Ms. Berejiklian submitted to the Commission that, as Premier, the ministerial code did not apply to her. Which is an interesting take on rules and laws, because you are either confessing you don't understand the job you held, which brings forward the fundamental question of why anyone thought it was appropriate to give it to you in the first place, or more realistically, you were lying to save yourself, which means that you were deliberately deceiving the public and therefore not qualified for the job or any large positions of responsibility. So you choose, Gladys. I suppose it's only fair. Which one is it, Gladys? So what happens next? Jail time? Paying the money back? Well, the ICAC has not called for criminal prosecution of the former Premier, though it will seek advice from the Director of Public Prosecutions over a case against Maguire. So I guess that's something. Why? We all scream as another politician deftly dodges justice. Well, in this case, at least the reasoning is clearer. In its report, counsel assisting the Commission submitted that as Berejiklian gave her evidence under objection, meaning it would not be admissible against her in a criminal prosecution. So, see, the ICAC has powers to compel people to give evidence that may incriminate them. However, that evidence can't actually be used in criminal proceedings. Jeffrey Watson, a director at the Centre for Public Integrity, said the reason why an ICAC finding of corrupt conduct doesn't necessarily equate to grounds for a criminal prosecution is rooted in the reasons behind the establishment of the corruption watchdog, saying the theoretical framework for an anti-corruption body is to go into areas where the police can't, and ICAC was established with a power to compel unwilling witnesses to give evidence, something our criminal justice system cannot do. Police cannot compel Berejiklian to provide the same evidence. Whereas Maguire was a bit stupid about it all, leaving a trail to follow as large as a Bigfoot stomping through wet concrete. Well, what about her job now? I mean, even PwC has been letting go of partners in the wake of its recent scandal. Surely Optus doesn't want this sort of scandal lingering over them. Well, ICAC's findings of serious corrupt conduct will likely have little effect on Gladys's career. Optus actually went on to say they won't be punishing Gladys Berejiklian for her ICAC corruption judgment, saying, "Man, it's why we hired her in the first place, and you know it." In response, Berejiklian has said, "Serving the people of New South Wales was an honour and a privilege. At all times, I've worked my hardest in the public interest." And she was kind of right. Once this came to the public, they were very interested. The public and the ICAC, they love a good drama that they can understand, at least, or one that they can relate to. Okay, so Gladys will only see some symbolic punishment. Surely someone will see consequences for something that they did. What about Stuart Robert, huh? That guy's fucked up a lot. Surely something's going to happen to him. After all, according to a statement to the Parliament's Audit Committee, the lobbying firm Synergy 360 proposed a structure designed to allow Stuart Robert to profit from government contracts that he helped with for his clients. Well, that's pretty corrupt. Are they openly confessing? What's the go here? Robert, of course, immediately rejected the allegation in the strongest possible terms, noting that it was made only under parliamentary privilege in an affidavit-style submission to a parliamentary inquiry, which affords them the legal protection of parliamentary privilege and keeps their maker safe from a defamation action. Which is just chef's kiss, you know? Doesn't it just suck when someone uses a system that you abused against you? Must suck for you, old Stewie boy. He said there was zero evidence in the submission, a thing that he would absolutely say despite having done a number of reprehensible things in his time in Parliament, including pushing through and doubling down on the rubber debt, despite his personal misgivings while the government sought legal advice, which he denied was wrongdoing in the administration of the program. I think maybe the issue here is with his definition of wrongdoing. Seems he has a fundamental misunderstanding of what that refers to. It doesn't mean have you done the right thing by you and your bank account. It means have you done the right thing towards your electorate and the large Australian population as a whole. You understand, Stu? Stu, baby? You get it? Anthony Daly, the former personal and business partner of Synergy 360, said that on September 8, 2017, the company's co-owner, David Milo, organised a meeting with former executive director Cam Zasavana to propose a transfer 20% of her shares to United Marketing, controlled by an individual named John McGearison. McGearison was the chair of Robert's Fadden Forum, a political fundraising vehicle that donated $30,000 each to two of Mr. Roberts' former staff members, including Kristen Boulton, who was running as an independent. And again, here comes Robert saying that the donations were to stop the ALP from gaining a foothold in the Gold Coast, admitting there should have been more transparency in using LNP funds for candidates who portrayed themselves as independent candidates. Oh, you think people might be interested in the minutiae of the financial fuckery that drives the wheels of Parliament? Well, they aren't, not often anyway, unless it's a juicy soap opera. But they still deserve a system that is better. At least this is better than his usual response of just saying, oh yeah, I knew it was wrong, but I did it anyway. There appears to be a tinge of acknowledgement of doing something wrong, just a tinge. But this was in 2017, so he probably allowed that to be crushed out of him with the heavy, heavy bags of money that he'd been getting away with receiving all of these years. Anthony Daly said ultimately this arrangement was designed to facilitate the flow of funds through United Marketing and onward to Stuart Robert. The main objective of this arrangement was to secure Stuart Roberts' involvement and support in acquiring federal government contracts. Stuart Roberts' political influence and connections within the government sector were deemed crucial in ensuring favourable outcomes. Daly said meetings would be organised after parliamentary hearings in Canberra and was told by Zasavana the majority of these meetings were deliberately omitted from Roberts' parliamentary diary to maintain confidentiality and avoid public awareness. The last thing any politician needs is an aware public. They hate being prodded from their daily drudgery to be forced to pay attention to some fuckery that a politician is doing. It does require a lot of reading, and I want to complain about my own shit for a minute, you know? God. Daly claimed in a statement that in 2018, Milo told him that Robert, then Minister for Human Social Services, had directed Centrelink leases towards properties owned by one of McGearison's companies, resulting in favourable terms such as high rents and long lease durations. This arrangement also extended to McGearison's health companies in relation to the NDIS. which is strange because Robert said that he didn't believe that he'd ever met Mr. Daly or spoken to him. Maybe it's all a misunderstanding. Maybe Stuart Roberts' desperation to draw attention to frauders in the Centrelink system, despite personal misgivings about how the debts were generated, are a desperate attempt to draw attention away from his own misdeeds, creating a pile of frauds and deception that the media can dig through when looking for a story in the future, and conveniently creating a smokescreen in Google search engines when you do a Google search for keywords Centrelink and misuse of funds. But who could say? Who could say such a thing? Bill Shorten said a review by former public servant Dr. Ian Watt found 19 of 95 procurements had real deficiencies. The committee had heard evidence from Magirison that in 2017 he had instructed his accountant to direct Synergy 360 profits derived from Commonwealth contracts to a trust to which Mr. Robert was a beneficiary. Stuart Robert is very much turning out to be the Michael Jordan of government contracts in that he didn't make his money from his actual job, but raked in millions from those side deals. Turns out, he's been the Minister for Side Hustles this whole time. The structure involved a trust being established where Synergy 360 would deposit funds. Robert would then receive payments including a 1% success fee derived from the value of any project and a monthly retainer of between $10,000 and $20,000. The committee heard that he had emailed his accountant to say, anything that comes in from this in the future, I will end up putting to Australian Property Trust, the same amount that comes in. Robert was a shareholder in the trust until 2018. Then, of course, smelling blood in the water, the rat Robert started preparations for abandoning the sinking ship, announcing his retirement from the Gold Coast seat of Fadden in May, triggering a by-election which will be held on the 15th of July. Quite fortunately and coincidentally, the Robodebt Royal Commission is due to report on the 7th of July after the Attorney General granted it a 1-week extension that would allow it to make referrals to the National Anti-Corrupt Committee. A wonderful stroke of fun, which may also take a moment to see some results, as the NAC has received some more than 40 referrals after becoming operational for only 2 days. Woo! When asked what he'd missed the most about being a parliament, Robert said, the side hustles, obviously, which for a man trying to maintain his innocence seems like a bit of a foolish error. And that is the end of the episode. Thank you so much for hanging around and listening. If you've enjoyed it, please, as always, tell a friend, share it wherever you can. If you see it on social media, share it around. If you know somebody who would enjoy it, get them to have a listen. I'd really appreciate that. If you can, come into town for any of the shows, please do. Remember, I'll be in Darwin the 21st and 22nd of July, in Edinburgh the 5th to the 27th of August, and in Sydney on the 14th, the 16th and the 17th of September, doing my show Wage Against the Machine, a storytelling show all about dodgy jobs that I used to work the $20,000 robo-debt that I got and breaking a 100-year-old roller coaster. I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for listening. Goodbye. See you next time. Bye-bye.